Stare at your palms right now. Regardless of its tone, yes, whether you're fair enough to be confused for a blank white page or deep enough to trap sunshine like a thermal grid, that hue didn't emerge from nowhere. It stems from one of the longest, weirdest, most spectacular biological shifts across the timeline of planet Earth. And the craziest detail? It wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't some stellar toss of the dice. This was a survival epic, a slow-motion evolutionary compromise between early humans and the sun. And the sun, for the record, was definitely not fighting fair. So what occurred? The explanation includes vitamin D, cancer, folate, Africa, ice ages, early agriculturalists who inadvertently altered their own development, plus a remarkably hostile star positioned 93 million miles away from us that triggered all of this and holds absolutely zero regrets. If you follow the human family lineage all the way back, every single one of our predecessors, irrespective of where you're from today, possessed dark skin. Every single one. Not some of them, not the majority, all of them. Roughly 300,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens initially emerged across Africa, the whole species was dark-skinned. There were no pale people. There were no fair-skinned societies anywhere on the globe. The notion of light skin didn't even exist yet among humans. Just think about that for a moment. Every individual you've ever viewed in a history text, every ancient society, every mythology, every cave painting, all of it leads back to a single ancestral group that looked completely unlike a massive segment of the modern human species, which implies at one point in history, something happened, something shifted, and that transition was so potent, so thoroughly hardwired into our genetics, that it altered the physical look of entire populations across diverse continents over tens of thousands of years. So what was it? Well, before we jump into that, we ought to grasp something about skin itself, because most folks possess absolutely zero clue what skin truly is, or what it's actually performing for you right this second. A lot of people treat skin like it's mere packaging, like it's the sack your body arrived in, the casing that keeps your organs together, while you wander around debating with strangers on the internet. However, skin is an organ, your largest organ, in reality, and it's performing nearly 47 distinct tasks simultaneously, most of which you never ponder over and never thank it for. One of those roles, arguably one of the most crucial, is shielding against UV radiation. UV radiation is the unseen energy the sun blasts toward Earth continually and aggressively, and it is not your friend. UV light severs chemical bonds, it harms DNA, it triggers mutations inside your cells, and if these mutations stack up in the worst places over sufficient time, they develop into cancer. Specifically, melanoma, one of the most vicious types of skin cancer in existence. Now, here's where skin tone becomes relevant. The compound that lends skin its hue is termed melanin. And melanin is, in the most literal biological sense, a sunblock, a natural, built-in, always-on UV shield. The more melanin your epidermis holds, the deeper it looks, and the more efficiently it stops UV rays from invading into the lower levels of tissue where your DNA resides. Deep skin isn't merely an aesthetic, it's a shield. This is why throughout Africa, where our lineage began, positioned directly beneath some of the most severe UV exposure on the whole globe, evolution selected firmly and quickly for dark skin. Harboring more melanin ensured your DNA was better defended. It ensured you were less prone to gather cancer-causing mutations. It meant you lived longer, remained healthier, and, most crucially from evolution's cold, calculating viewpoint, were far likelier to survive long enough to procreate and pass your genes to the next generation. Natural selection is essentially a remarkably slow, highly ruthless optimization algorithm. It doesn't fret about aesthetics, it doesn't hold opinions regarding beauty, it doesn't wake up in the morning having a design for what the human species should look like. It executes one equation over and over and over again, billions of times among billions of organisms. Does this feature help you live long enough to produce offspring? If yes, retain it. If no, discard it. Across equatorial Africa, beneath that scorching sun, deep skin was a solid, definitive yes. Every generation, every instance. Yet here's the catch, and this is where the narrative becomes truly, surprisingly intricate. UV radiation doesn't simply assault your skin cells, it likewise targets something within your body, something tiny, unseen, and incredibly vital. Something that, if you ruin it in the wrong individual at the worst moment, might terminate a pregnancy before it even truly starts. The particle in focus is named folate. It's a variant of vitamin B9, and it circulates through your bloodstream, performing crucial physiological upkeep tasks. Now, you could be pondering, all right, vitamin B, seems like something my physician advised me to consume more of. Why does this count for skin tone? It counts tremendously, particularly if you are expecting or attempting to get pregnant. Folate is paramount for the formation of the neural tube within embryos. The neural tube is the tissue that ultimately becomes the brain and spinal cord. Without adequate folate during the initial few weeks of gestation, occasionally before a mother even realizes she's pregnant, the neural tube might fail to seal correctly. The results are devastating. Neural tube anomalies, drastic developmental irregularities, miscarriage. Now, here's the issue. UV radiation obliterates folate. When UV rays pierce the epidermis and enter the bloodstream, they break apart folate particles. And within a sun-soaked landscape like equatorial Africa, featuring no garments, no shelter, no sunblock, UV exposure remained constant, fierce, and inescapable. This produced an extra, punishing evolutionary pressure. Expectant mothers bearing paler skin, lacking melanin, with UV piercing deeper, suffered greater rates of folate degradation. Increased rates of folate depletion equaled higher rates of neural tube flaws. Elevated rates of neural tube flaws equaled fewer surviving children. Thus, today we see not one, but two entirely separate reasons why deep skin was strongly, intensely, undeniably preferred beneath the African sun. First, melanin shielded DNA against UV harm, lowering cancer risks. Second, melanin safeguarded folate for expecting women, maintaining reproductive viability. Two distinct dangers, one biological fix. Deep skin across Africa wasn't merely helpful, it was practically required for the continuation of our species. Alright, so deep pigmentation is this multitasking biological super shield. It prevents cancer, it preserves folate, it has been battle-tested and refined throughout hundreds of thousands of millennia. If evolution featured a feedback system, deep skin would boast a 5-star score alongside thousands of stellar endorsements. So why, in the name of all logic, did it shift? Why did groups that departed Africa wind up becoming paler and paler across thousands of years? The solution highlights one of the most graceful, harsh trade-offs in all of evolutionary science. Between approximately 70,000 and 100,000 years prior, bands of Homo sapiens started exiting Africa. It wasn't a lone dramatic occurrence. No person arranged a conference. No individual declared a massive migration. It involved slow generational wandering. A tribe travels a bit farther than their elders did. Their offspring journey a bit farther today. Across thousands of years, people expanded through the Middle East, into Europe, throughout Asia, and ultimately toward the Americas. And as they migrated north, something basic regarding their surroundings shifted. The sunlight grew weaker, not the star itself. The star stayed just as apathetic and nuclear as forever. But at upper latitudes, sunshine strikes Earth from a lower angle. It travels through thicker atmosphere before it hits you. UV radiation gets filtered out. Days grow shorter. Winters stretch long and dark. The sky stays cloudy for months. Across northern Europe, throughout northern Asia, inside Canada, the UV climate looks radically, drastically distinct from equatorial Africa. Instead of brutally harsh radiation you ought to block, you encounter faint sporadic radiation you desperately require to absorb. And suddenly the deep pigmentation that seemed perfect in Africa became a liability, not due to cancer. The tumor threat at northern latitudes boasting faint UV proved significantly lower, not due to folate. Reduced UV guaranteed less folate breakdown, so that appeared fine. No, the dilemma was completely different, something which doesn't receive nearly enough spotlight in this tale. Vitamin D. Vitamin D gets manufactured inside the epidermis whenever UVB radiation strikes a chemical named 7-dehydrocholesterol. Your skin functions essentially like solar arrays. It utilizes sunlight as an energy source to produce this crucial compound. Plus, vitamin D is entirely mandatory. Not even a tiny bit. It remains absolutely critical for human health. Vitamin D manages calcium plus phosphorus uptake within the intestines. Lacking it, calcium won't become fully absorbed, no matter how much milk you ingest. Without calcium, skeletons won't harden properly. Among children, extreme vitamin D shortages trigger rickets, an illness that weakens and warps the skeleton, bends the legs outward, forces the cranium to compress, and halts growth. For adult women, vitamin D starvation might spark a disorder termed osteomalacia, which weakens the pelvic structure. And weaker malformed pelvic frames render childbirth exceptionally perilous, sometimes impossible. Mothers suffering extreme vitamin D shortages face drastically elevated rates of mortality during delivery. Yet vitamin D scarcity doesn't end with the skeleton. It likewise cripples immune responses, leaving you highly vulnerable to sickness. It impacts muscular power. It alters cardiovascular wellness. Certain studies tie chronic shortages to depression, alongside cognitive decay. Vitamin D handles so much physiological labor that once you run out of it, the organism begins collapsing across multiple systems simultaneously. Next, place a dark-skinned individual within Northern Europe 40,000 years past. They possess incredibly effective melanin. Their tissue repels UV radiation flawlessly, which proves brilliant across Africa. Yet in the gloomy, cloudy, dim-lit north, that exact melanin is currently blocking the vital UV they require to manufacture vitamin D. Their flesh cannot spot the distinction between harmful UV it must block and helpful UV it desperately needs. It simply blocks. Thus, they cannot generate ample vitamin D. Their calcium uptake plummets, their skeletons deteriorate, their offspring develop rickets, mothers perish during labor. The community begins shrinking. Deep skin across northern regions wasn't merely a handicap. Inside a pre-industrial era offering zero supplements, no enriched meals, no medical treatments, it became a death warrant stretched across generations. And evolution, that frigid, ruthless, infinitely patient mechanism, began selecting against it. Alterations which lowered melanin creation started emerging throughout the group, randomly like mutations always act. Yet instead of getting discarded, they multiplied, since individuals sporting marginally fairer skin manufactured slightly more vitamin D, built slightly stronger bones, enjoyed marginally better reproductive outcomes. Generation following generation, marginally paler, marginally paler, marginally paler. Across thousands of years, the typical skin shade of northern societies shifted lighter. Not because somebody chose it should, not due to culture or preference or societal pressures, but since within that precise environment, at that exact latitude, given that specific volume of sunshine, paler skin kept more humans breathing. The program had merely flipped its variables. For a long stretch, researchers presumed the fading of European communities occurred slowly throughout hundreds of thousands of years, a gradual, consistent genetic shift as groups traveled north. Modern ancient DNA research has utterly shattered this hypothesis and substituted it using something vastly more fascinating. Primeval European hunter-gatherers, the folks who resided across Europe for tens of thousands of years following the primary exodus out of Africa, remain still remarkably dark-skinned. Even after dwelling at upper latitudes for a profoundly extended duration, they hadn't severely lightened. The most renowned instance involves a skeleton labeled as Cheddar Man. He resided inside what is currently Britain roughly 10,000 years past. Prehistoric DNA sequencing released during 2018 demonstrated he probably possessed deep to medium dark skin, dark textured hair, plus blue eyes. A pairing which appears nearly contradictory for modern observers since we've grown to link blue eyes alongside highly fair skin. Yet 10,000 years back, that wasn't really the norm. The incredibly pale complexion people connect with Northwestern Europeans nowadays, the type which fries under just 12 minutes of summer sunlight, seems to have propagated broadly among European societies merely throughout approximately the final 6,000 to 8,000 years. This is astonishingly fresh. Throughout the entire 300,000-year timeline regarding Homo sapiens, that's shorter than the final 3%. Thus, what occurred 6,000 through 8,000 years past that abruptly expedited this transformation so intensely? The explanation involves one of the largest shifts during human antiquity, yet virtually nobody discusses regarding its impact upon skin tone. The Neolithic Revolution, the transition from foraging and hunting toward agriculture. Once humanity shifted toward farming, their nutrition altered entirely and forever. Hunter-gatherers consumed a diverse menu which organically contained substantial volumes of vitamin D. Greasy fish such as salmon plus mackerel. Internal organs including liver and kidney. Shellfish alongside various animal items which stand among the densest edible suppliers of vitamin D available. Agricultural communities ingested primarily grains, wheat, barley, oats, rye, starches. Their nutritional vitamin D consumption didn't merely dip, it plunged. Instantly, societies which had survived fine upon using minor levels of UV-generated vitamin D, since their meals were likewise assisting, stood currently almost wholly reliant upon whatever their epidermis could generate. And provided their skin remained still relatively deep, that proved insufficient. The evolutionary push toward fairer complexions escalated enormously. Even slight boosts regarding vitamin D manufacturing capacity, even fractionally lower melanin, grew immensely vital for existence. However, there's an additional element which forced this shift forward quicker. Agricultural settlements stood massive. They grew crowded. They stayed stationary. Furthermore, population scale plus density carry massive impacts upon how rapidly a beneficial mutation might propagate throughout a gene pool. Within a tiny dispersed hunter-gatherer tribe holding 50 individuals, a favorable mutation could require a very lengthy period to access even adjacent clans. Inside an agricultural town housing hundreds linked into a system of varied farming communities, a helpful alteration may transmit across thousands of descendants within merely a handful generations. The dual nutritional vitamin D plunge, alongside population density, basically pressed the fast-forward switch regarding European whitening. Within a couple thousand years, the evolutionary force, which was previously silently pushing skin shades paler across tens of millennia, abruptly turned fierce, swift, and observable throughout the fossil archives. Here's a fact which truly shocks many individuals whenever they initially learn it. Skin tone is not dictated through one lone gene. There is no dark pigment gene versus light pigment gene wherein one overpowers the alternate. It's much more complex than this. Skin coloration represents a polygenic characteristic. It's managed through dozens of varied genes, collaborating closely. Genetics which dictate how much melanin gets generated, which variant of melanin gets formed, how melanin particles stay scattered throughout dermal cells, and how the exterior reacts against UV sunlight across time. And here's what renders this utterly astounding. Distinct societies which separately developed fairer complexions did not utilize the identical genes to accomplish it. East Asians and Europeans both sport notably paler tones than equatorial Africans. Yet the genomic mutations accountable for lighter flesh among East Asians stand mostly distinct from those mutations accountable across Europeans. They reach these parallel results via varying molecular pathways. This is termed convergent evolution. The identical evolutionary fix, paler tones amid low UV zones, uncovered separately via entirely distinct biological avenues, by unconnected societies occupying distinct continents. Ponder upon what this implies. The biological demand remained so fierce, so constant, so undeniable, that natural selection generated the identical solution several times. Not once, not twice, numerous times, independently. Whenever evolution continuously reconstructs anything from scratch, that's as loud a message as nature ever hands you, proving the feature in focus truly, profoundly counts regarding survival. While we're exploring this genetic neighborhood, let's discuss a topic nearby that remains equally mind-bending: blue irises. Every solitary human breathing today sporting blue eyes, every last one, zero exceptions, has descended from a single individual. One human, one alteration, one instant located near the Black Sea territory, roughly 6,000 through 10,000 years prior. Before that human was born, the whole human race sported brown eyes. Everyone. Brown, brown, absolutely just brown, as far back as we track. Next, this singular anomaly emerged, an alteration which dropped melanin synthesis directly inside the iris, and it multiplied. Gradually at first, then quicker, since it stood likely genetically tied toward skin coloration mutants which found themselves facing heavy selection. Now ponder something as apparently ancient plus fundamental as blue irises. A feature having been applied to divide humans among groups across history, proves newer than the dawn of farming. It's newer than Stonehenge. It's fresher than the taming of wild horses. We view specific human qualities as ancient plus primeval, although they stand, in geological or even historical scopes, essentially brand new. The addition of mankind we consider to be standard and permanent remains still actively evolving. Let's take one step back to view the total grand picture. Skin tone, the trait which has steered so much of human history, molded political regimes, rationalized atrocities, split and arranged populations among rankings across millennia, remains, at its biological root, a UV calibration tool. It remains a gauge, an adaptive mechanism, your organism's finest hereditary guess regarding how much solar defense you require, considering the coordinate your ancient predecessors managed to occupy, the food they managed to consume, alongside the star they happened to survive beneath. Pale skin isn't superior in any universal regard. Across equatorial zones, it's genuinely hazardous. Higher UV invasion, greater genetic damage, heightened tumor risk, massive folate devastation. Pale tone across Africa presents a fatal handicap. Deep tone isn't less advanced or primitive. It represents the foundational state. The primary setting, the standard from where everything subsequent acts as modification. If anything, paler skin forms the modern upgrade, the adjustment, the variation. Deep flesh remains the default, while the greatest paradox of all is this: that very star which pushed certain groups to produce extra melanin to withstand its intensity, simultaneously forced alternate groups to generate less pigment, since they required more of its scarce energy. The star never chose sides. The sun lacked any preferences. The star simply shined apathetically and let nature figure out the rest. Mankind constructed an entire civilization's load of bigotry, subjugation, and stratification surrounding a vitamin D dilemma, a calcium processing hurdle, a folate preservation reflex. Human populations keep constantly evolving, gradually, nearly invisibly across an individual time span, yet changing regardless. Those evolutionary demands which sculpted skin tone remain actively present throughout the biosphere, even though modern innovation has somewhat dampened them. We consume vitamin D pills nowadays. We utilize sunblock. People consume enriched groceries alongside artificial illumination, plus warmed dwellings alongside year-round access toward meals spanning every latitude across Earth. We've forged a society which partially detaches dermal biology away from initial functions. The biological algorithm remains actively processing, however we've altered the variables. What this implies regarding the human lineage throughout the upcoming 100,000 years, nobody could predict. Evolution doesn't publish updates, yet what we may state bearing absolute certainty is that every tint of human flesh which remains today represents the legacy of the identical ancestral tribe standing beneath the African sun, steadily migrating across an unforgiving globe while carrying etched inside melanin, the exact chronicle tracking every landscape their descendants migrated through. Every skin shade forms an answer toward a riddle posed by a star, and every solitary response proved flawless.